Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today I'm here with Jack to go over the Crimson Invasion complete set. It has been one that many people have been saying is underwhelming, but we have done our best to get the most interesting and powerful cards from this set, and we're going to be discussing them today. It will be going legal for the London Intercontinentals, so it is a very important set to keep an eye on because it will potentially be impactful for what does well at the first internationals of the year. So definitely one that many players are looking into and need to get testing right away. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, and as normal, we have indeed got our regular rating system that we've started using over the past couple of set reviews. This 5-star rating just kind of gives you an idea of what these cards are like. So feel free to pause if you just want to have a quick sort of in-depth look at what each of these stars mean. Bear in mind, ratings are all given based on sort of the current format and where we are right now. We've just had a couple of regionals, standard regionals over in the US, and there was one in Europe as well. So we've kind of got these results in mind, but we have also had some consideration for expanded in the discussion as well, because there are a couple of cards that are straight upgrades from cards in expanded that you'll see as we sort of dive into this set. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're looking at what we've got today. So starting us off, we're not actually going to look straight into Crimson Invasion. We're going to look at some of the 3 GXs or the 3 Ultra Beast GXs that aren't actually in the set: Pheromosa, Celesteela, and Xurkitree. The first one is indeed Pheromosa. Pretty interesting GX, 170 HP grass type with a fire weakness is pretty underwhelming considering Volk is quite a good Pokemon right now and quite a good archetype. And 170 is actually kind of on the low end for these basic GXs. We're starting to see them more regularly have 190 HP. So 170 is actually kind of underwhelming. But still, for 1 grass, you've got Fast Raid, does 30 damage, and if you go first, you can use this attack on your first turn. Very similar to Latios EX from the tins that's still in the format and was indeed in Roaring Skies as well. Not overly relevant while we don't have too many grass weak things in the format. It means that you can't really steal games too well or apply too much early pressure. But this can easily just take out Froakies if you're really hating on Greninja. So Pheromosa is definitely the card to play if you're not a fan of playing against Greninja. But other than that, Grass isn't a particularly sort of insane type to be right now. But it's definitely a card to consider if Grass ever is a really, really strong type, simply because being able to fast raid on a GX that's weak to Grass with a choice band actually is 120 before your opponent even draws a card. So that's actually a really, really a huge amount of damage. So it's definitely something to consider about the card. For a second Grass energy, for 2 Grass, you've got Cruel Spike doing 60 damage and confusing your opponent's active. Confusion isn't quite as strong as it has been in the past sort of few months, considering we now have Acerola and Guzma in the format, but it can still be pretty annoying. It forces these supporters out of your opponent or forces a retreat, meaning that they can't do things like N or Sycamore to sort of progress their game state as well. So it can be sort of quite annoying. Plus with a choice band, plus a confusion flip, you're doing 120, which means Cruel Spike can move up to 210 damage if you're able to hit it again, provided they flip tails at least once, which 210 is a pretty good number to hit right now. And then finally the GX attack, Beauty GX. That is indeed why we've got this little table down here. It does 50 times the number of prize cards your opponent has taken. So this makes Pheromosa actually a really, really good late game sweeper or late game finisher, just because if they've taken 3 to 4 prizes, you can easily, as you can see, be hitting 180 to 230 damage, both pretty relevant numbers. And your opponent will often take 3 to 4 prizes relatively quickly at sort of a similar pace to you. So this can be a really, really strong card to sort of finish off the game for 1 or 2 energy. And as you can see, we've added in some Sunny Day maths as well, because this could be one of the ways you could play Pheromosa. Sort of a Lurantis, Elixirs, could be the way that you actually make Pheromosa work. It actually pushes some of sort of Fast Raid and Cruel Spike's numbers into some nicer numbers as well if you have 1 or 2 Lurantis out, which is really, really nice. Overall, I don't think the card's insanely good. It could see some sort of fringe play in things like Vikabulu as a late game sweeper. But Vikabulu doesn't typically have a particularly hard time of one-shotting things if it's playing the choice band build, because you can do 210 with Bulu himself. So it could be seen as a late game sweeper in that deck, but there's sort of justification for just running Bulus themselves simply because you're then able to, or you should have the ability to just one-shot stuff anyway. Plus, there is another GX we're going to talk about later on, which has a slightly better GX attack potentially for the deck overall. But just a couple of other options. Venusaur obviously fits with this card pretty well, meaning that all of your attacks cost 1 energy, which is fantastic. Beauty GX for 1 energy is just bonkers. So yeah, there's definitely some options for Pheromosa. I think it's probably not going to see too much play because of its weakness and because grass in general isn't a particularly good type right now. But it's definitely one to keep in mind, especially because of that fast rate attack. If we ever get a particularly relevant grass weak GX, you could, like I say, you could be doing 120 on your turn 1 before they've even drawn a card, which is bonkers, really.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much just below the line. Its regular damage output isn't enough with Cruel Spike. Yes, with Venusaur you could be doing single energy choice band to do 90 a turn. Maybe try and combine that with like Acerola, but if you're playing a stage 2 deck, you don't really have the space for all of these cool things. So I think it'll either just be too clunky if you put it in a stage 2 deck, or it may just be not a high enough power level when you're playing it with Lurantis. But I really like its GX attack, and I think it could find a home in some places just off that alone. So it is one to bear in mind. This is one of the better revenge style attackers that we've seen as of late, so it's a pretty cool one. On to Celesteela GX. This was, for many people, the hopes and dreams of the format were resting on this guy's shoulders for trying to be the dude that could own Gardevoir GX and really shake up the format. And after many people saw it, they were immediately disappointed by Celesteela GX, because he is a heavy Pokemon. He takes a lot of energy himself, which is always a downside against Gardevoir. However, I believe that if you do play a heavy Celesteela GX deck, you probably should still beat Guardy just because of type advantage alone, and 200 HP is decent. So let's look at the raw stats on this guy. As I said, 200 HP on a basic is really, really strong. Very good stuff there. 4 retreat cost is a bit whatever. You have resistance to fighting, which could be becoming a little bit more relevant at the very least. And you have weakness to lightning, which isn't amazing because Tapu Koko can choice band and flying flip, and Koko is in a bunch of decks right now. Still seeing play just because you can hit for weakness on Ho-Oh. But now Celesteela has that issue, which is a big problem, especially because it's not easy to hit back on the Tapu Kokos because they have free retreat, which is brings us on to his first attack, Rocket Fall, for a metal and 2 colorless energy. You deal 30 plus 30 more damage for each of your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost. You can see again, we've gone back to the chart down below. I've got a little bit optimistic, hoping that with Alolan Dugtrio and his Tangled Hair ability, you can hopefully improve the numbers on this attack. I think if there's any approach, this will be it, because his regular attack, Moon Press, the one that's slightly more expensive for an extra colorless energy, just deals 130 and has no other text on the card, which is really inefficient, actually. Very bad second attack. So the hope is to use Alolan Dugtrio, maybe Mount Lanakila, and Choice Band to ramp up the damage from Rocket Fall. That would be the intention of the Celesteela deck. But I think a lot of the time you're looking for solid 2-hit KOs and just hoping that your own tankiness forces other decks into 2-hit KOs at the same time. What I do like is his GX attack, Blaster GX. For a metal and 3 colorless, you deal 180, and you get to turn all your prize cards face up, and they remain face up for the rest of the game. So it's a town map effect, but as an attack, so you're not having to sacrifice a whole card from your deck. Now simply you can take a 1-hit KO during your game, whilst also getting an upside of seeing your prize cards. I believe you take prize cards first and then resolve the effect of the attack, but I'm not certain about this. If you can flip over your prize cards and then pick the 2 that you take with this attack, that could be really insane.
Yeah, I think that's how it works. I think you resolve all effects and then check for knockouts.
That's insane. That's so good. that could be actually really good. So that's cool. Yeah. The GX attack is definitely cool.
Don't quote me, but I think you resolve all effects and then check for knockouts.
Yeah, that's actually the order. Yeah.
So.
Oh my god, that's beast.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Stealing my guy. But yeah, okay. So Rocket Fall, I think looking at the numbers down below, the fact that you'd have to have multiple stage 1 set up throughout the game, you'd have to have abilities throughout the game, and you have to constantly be field blowing float stones off things, probably means that he falls short as a main attacker. But just because of his HP as a great baseline, and just because he's metal, I think he's worth considering and playing around with. But overall, I think he is just a little bit shy of the mark, and unfortunately is not the saviour we were all hoping for.
Yeah, this card wasn't quite what everyone was hoping for. I'm a Guardy player, so I was quite happy when I found out Celesteela wasn't all that amazing. But that being said, it's certainly not like just binder worthy or bulk worthy. Like, the GX attack is really, really cool. It's unfortunate that it's kind of anti-synergistic, given that it takes so long to set up, meaning that you're probably, like, if you're taking that long to set up, maybe you could have been taking prizes in other ways. But that being said, it's still a really, really strong effect. And yeah, Rocketfall obviously can deal with Guardies, but unfortunately, I think it's slightly too inefficient to be able to. It's got a really good Guardian matchup, but I think it's slightly too inefficient to be able to justify its place in the rest of the format. But the fact, like you say, it has 200 HP and isn't weak to Volk, I think are two very, very strong merits for the card. And maybe this sort of Celesteela Metal Box deck will work. Obviously, any deck that has essentially a free win against Guardy is definitely worth considering. I think Guardy is undoubtedly going to be one of the biggest archetypes in London, if not the biggest. So if you're going in knowing that you can beat your 2 or 3 rounds of Guardy no matter what, you're going to have at least a semi-decent day. So if you can then work out how to navigate the rest of the matchups, then you could have something strong there. But again, I'm also not personally too sold on Celesteela as being the big Guardy counter that everyone kind of was hoping it would be. I think we're going to talk about a card later on that actually may do it slightly better. But that being said, it's still maybe worth considering Celesteela as a 1 or 2 of, just in any deck that's running Metal Energy, just because if you're able to get off that GX attack, it's actually pretty game-breaking. We've seen Town Map Index ever since it's been out. Whether it's been particularly popular or not, it's still seen somewhat some amount of play. So it's obviously a strong effect. And being able to combine that with a knockout as well is obviously really, really good. Finally, before we get onto Crimson Invasion, we still have Xurkitree GX. This is actually my favourite of the 3 GXs that aren't in the set. Very, very reminiscent to the Aegislash you can see poking behind the Xurkitree. Flash Head is pretty much identical to Aegislash's ability, preventing all damage done to Xurkitree by attacks from each of the opponent's Pokemon that has any special energies attached to it. Specials are pretty big right now. A lot of decks are running either DCE or Rainbow Energy. A lot of Garb decks are running DCE and Rainbow Energy, but a lot of decks in general run DCE, which is pretty nice. So just having to force them to either activate their ability lock or take 6 prizes elsewhere can actually mean if they don't have a significant way of being able to deal with ability lock or get ability lock online, you can actually really sort of put people in checkmate positions, which is really nice. Rumble Wire for Lightning colorless does 100 damage and discards the top card of your opponent's deck. Nothing too major. With a choice band, that's 130. That's comfortably 2-shotting pretty much everything in the format. And that discard can be useful. It will get a DC every now and again, but it will also just get a dead card every now and again. So, it's kind of the effect isn't sort of irrelevant, but it's not particularly relevant either. The really, really important part of this card is the GX attack, Lightning GX for 1 Lightning Energy. Your opponent reveals their hand. You put a card you find there face down as one of your opponent's prizes. This can actually be really, really disruptive, both in the early game and in the late game. At the moment, there's a lot of people going for turn 1 Bridget, and often leaving themselves with a low hand size because they've had to sort of Ultra Ball for Lele for Bridget and just held their last supporter in hand or whatever. So being able to respond on that kind of turn can actually mean your opponent has got a really strong board setup, but then has nothing to do with their turn afterwards. They're then top decking in a hand of 1 or 2 cards. Maybe they're not able to find a supporter to start evolving their Pokemon or whatever. So it's actually pretty relevant in the early turns as well as the late turns. Combining this with a late game N is really, really strong because you can N your opponent down to a relatively low hand size and then sort of put another card on top of their into their prizes from their hand. So it's essentially giving them it's like an N but a -2 to the regular N they'd get as well, which is really, really nice. There are some fun combos you can do with this as well. Things like Delinquent Red Card or Delinquent Marshadow is a lot of fun. You can actually, from turn 1, force your opponent down to a 0-card hand, which sounds horrible. I don't think there's enough sort of to back Xurkitree on that sort of in that sense of the card in order for it to be a proper disruption deck. But I think it will see play simply because Flash Head is a pretty strong ability, and as you can see, we've got a Vikavolt and a Hala there. This was the GX I was talking about, being placed in Vikabulu. This is a really nice early game attack. There'll be a lot of games where you don't actually use Tapu Bulu's GX attack. A lot of decks just hit 180 now, so Tapu Bulu isn't often healing itself and doing 150 anymore. So you can now early game Lightning GX to disrupt the opponent. Plus, it also turns on or activates your Howlers, which is really big for Vikavolt because Vikavolt is just a deck that needs cards, and as soon as it has the cards and it's set up, it just sort of runs on its own. So it's a nice sort of buff to Vikabulu, whilst also having a semi-relevant GX attack that can be used in the early game and a really strong ability as well.
Yeah, the ability has to be the thing that you look at first because Ada/EX was seen as a tech card in a bunch of decks. It wasn't only metal decks that played him. Oftentimes he would be a wall when DC-based decks are prevalent, and he could once again see himself being a wall at some point in the game. You can see the Donphan down in the corner. Donphan's going to be good and expanded because Zoroark GX is good and expanded, so having another card, the Xurkitree and the Hooper that have just come out, Donphan looks pretty good for expanded, and Xurkitree is like a strict upgrade to the Aegislash because he has 10 more HP. So yeah, he's good just for the ability, but the GX attack as well has sold me. Bear in mind that, yeah, I typed it out wrong. It's just because it's called Lightning GX, so I automatically just reduced the lightning word down to an L, thinking it was a lightning energy. But yeah, just one lightning energy to do that GX attack is really good, and Hala is the best supporter in the game once you've used a GX attack. So being able to do this on turn 1 now, with this, and there's the Kartana that we'll talk about later that also has a single energy GX attack, Hala could be seeing more value soon because he is really nuts. Shuffle 7 is insane at times, so Vikabulu, a deck that's never wanted to play Professor Sycamore because of resources, now being able to play Hala is a big deal. And at the same time, as Jack mentioned, the biggest thing is decks rely on Bridget turn 1, and oftentimes people can only Bridget if they have another supporter in their hand. And typically they'll only have one other supporter or one Lele or one Ultra Ball left in their hand. Now with a quick Lightning GX attack, you can really set them on the back foot and leave them just with a field of like 60 HP Pokemon because they've gone for their Bridget and they're hoping to be fine next turn. So yeah, it's a really dirty GX attack, and it puts them to an extra prize that they have to take. So yeah, just hope they don't top deck N and then shuffle their own hand to 7. But otherwise, it's a pretty good card. Okay, let's start with the main set now. First of all, quick shout out to Kakuna. It has the Sprout attack. Search your deck for up to 3 Kakuna and put them onto your bench. Shuffle your deck afterwards. It's water duplicates, but it's for Kakunas this time. And who cares, because Beedrill is really bad. Swarming Sting will never do enough damage. Think about Greninja. Think about how their opening turns are so awkward and bad. And think about how difficult it is to get, like 2 Greninjas out on turn 3. Well, Beedrill kind of needs to have like 4 out to be doing worthwhile damage enough of the time with Swarming Sting. They need an extra energy. There is counter energy available, so potentially they could make use of that, because trust me, you'll go down in prizes. But yeah, Beedrill's just not strong enough. So shout out to Kakuna. If ever we get a Beedrill GX, we can be hype. But until then, it's one for the binder. Or just one not to get.
Yeah, you've just got to point out, because obviously Frogadier had such a strong, it is such a strong card, but it's also complemented by strong evolutions as well. So unfortunately, for now, Kakuna is just one to grab a playset of and shove in the back of the binder in case we ever see a very competitive Beedrill again. But it's worth noting that we do have this engine that we have seen work in the past. Next up, we have Alolan Marowak. Really cool card art-wise. I've seen this card IRL, and it looks really good. And it's got a pretty interesting burst attack for 0 energy, running on this Alolan Pokemon theme, having 0 energy attack costs. We have Fire Dance, which counts the number of energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Move the same amount of fire energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. So it's very reminiscent of Nitro Tank. Obviously, that gets a straight 5. This can get more or less than 5, but You know, you can use it multiple times. You can use it for without attaching to the active. So it's sort of pros and cons on how sort of usable it is compared to Nitro Tank. Unfortunately, it's a stage 1, and that's kind of what is holding this card back. Turtonator being a basic means that you can just drop Turtonator and attach to then Nitro Tank GX and get a huge sort of tempo swing of 5 energy on the board out of nowhere. Whereas this guy's going to take an extra turn, to set up. Whilst you're not going to have to attach the energy to Alolan Marowak, you're still having to wait that extra turn. This means your opponent has time to do things like Guzma and stuff. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting attack. But unfortunately, Turtonator just in general, I think, outshines it on from sort of an acceleration standpoint, just because it's a little bit more immediate. You're technically getting, I guess, potentially 1 net less energy. But your opponent also has to have quite a lot of energy on the board for you to be getting a particularly big tempo swing, whereas Turtonator gets a flat out 5 or 4 if you're like sort of counting the energy you have to attach to Turtonator as a negative. Still, 4 energy is really, really strong, whereas this Alolan Marowak isn't going to be getting 4 in the early turns. Maybe towards the mid to late game it will be. But Turtonator can just sort of do that from turn 1 or 2, provided you're able to steam up a bunch and things like that. Burning Boomerang is pretty irrelevant for fighting colors to 70 times the amount of heads you flip on 2 coins, and then you get a burn if either of them is heads. You're never going to attach 3 energy to 100 HP. Water weak Pokemon. It's just never going to happen. So yeah, unfortunately, whilst it's really, really cool, Fire Dance just isn't quite good enough, I don't think. But it's interesting that we're still seeing these free attacks, and they're getting more creative as well, I think.
Yeah, it's a creative design. I think, Marowak is too many deck slots to commit to something that you already have in the Fire decks. Plus, Turtonator has really good other attacks. Marowak doesn't, so outshone by Turtonator. But again, cool effect, and good to see that they're carrying on with Alolan free attack costs. Quick shout out to Swinub, who is an upgrade for the Pillow-Swine deck that isn't a deck, but
the
maybe
infamous Pillow-Swine deck.
Maybe now it can be, because we finally have a 3 retreat cost Swinub, which means it'll be easier to ramp up the damage for gathering footsteps on your Pillow-Swine and maybe reach 1-hit KOs. Fighting is becoming a more relevant type in Expanded. This is a fighting Pokemon, and you can do a lot better numbers now. Probably still won't work because its energy attack cost is gross, and it's probably way too slow for Expanded to play an evolution deck pretty much at all. But who knows? With heavy balls now, with Bridget, it could work out. Probably won't though. But
it's a buff, right?
Yeah, it's a buff.
Speaking of buffs, we also have a buff to Magikarp or the Gyarados deck in general and Expanded. Obviously, this is rotated out of Standard now, but Magikarp is actually a 2-star card simply because it's actually a really, really relevant buff. Submerge. Magikarp only has 30 HP, but Submerge means that as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, which is where you want your Magikarps, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks, meaning that Tapu Koko no longer flying flips your life away, which is really, really good, considering you have to put 20 damage on each of your Magikarps just to be doing good numbers with full retaliation. Waterfall Evolution is never going to get used because you don't really play Water Energy, but this is now the best Magikarp to use in this style of Gyarados deck, which is really, really interesting. We could now see Gyarados make a bit of a comeback in Expanded because it's a non-EX deck that doesn't lose to Karen. It kind of still potentially loses to Oricorio, but it's much more manageable because that places counters. It does get around the submergibility, but as long as you keep an eye on your discard pile, you don't have to discard Pokemon. So you can get around Oricorio as well. So it may be worth reconsidering Gyarados and Expanded. Maybe it's still not quite good enough, but that being said, the deck certainly gets a buff with this Magikarp, and the art is also really, really cool on this card as well. So that's another positive as well. The only downside is you can't use the golden ones anymore.
Yeah, small downside there. But yeah, Magikarp's cool, good ability, definite immediate buff from the other Magikarps that we played in Gyarados. In Expanded, it has to worry about Trev a lot, but I think that's pretty much one of the only bad matchups for the deck, other than just other item lock things. So yeah, maybe Gyarados can start showing up in Expanded. Next up, we have Gyarados GX. This is a very tanky Stage 1. It's a 240 HP Stage 1 Pokemon. So think of it as like a Primal Groudon or a Primal Kyogre. That's just a big dude, and you don't even need a Spirit Link on him. So that is really, really good for a Stage 1. Unfortunately, however, that's the best part about this card, because as we move down to its attacks, we see for Water Colorless, it's again just 70 damage and no text on the card. It's really bizarre that they've just gone for a few Pokemon in this set that just don't have text. And Water Colorless, even with Aqua Patch DCE, like 70 is so far below the line. It's unreal, really. And then we look at Dragon Disaster. Oh man, this is a disaster. It's 5 energy. Only one of them has to be colorless. So again, DC can help us out and Aqua Patch can help us out, but it's still the big 5. I mean, giving Gardevoir 150 damage for free is just silly. It does 100 base, and if there's a Stadium card in play, this attack does 100 more. Then you discard that Stadium card, so even to do good damage, you need to constantly have Stadiums in play. There are good Stadiums for Water decks to play. There's things like Brooklet Hill, which is kind of cool, but as if you're attaching 5 energy and not guaranteeing knockouts on things. It's just really ridiculous. It's the same attack as Primal Groudon, but for 1 more energy, which is really bad. So yeah, very, very awkward. Its GX attack is Dreadstorm GX. Discard 1 energy card from your opponent's Pokemon. It's weird that this is the only quote-unquote efficient attack that Gyarados has. It doesn't really fit the theme of Gyarados too much, other than the fact that it's going to take you a million turns to power him up, so you set your opponent back a turn in theory. Sorry, it's from each of your opponent's Pokemon, not just one of their Pokemon. So it's rare that your opponent's going to attach multiple around the board too quickly. A lot of the time in the game at the moment, you're committing everything to 1. If not, they're just going to have acceleration anyway. So I don't think it's an amazing GX attack. It does stall you a little bit, but probably not enough to get into 5 energy a lot of the time. So there's some cute things. There's the new Shining Celebi, and there's the Flail Magikarp that you could try and bait your opponent into hitting this big 240 HP beast. But really, it's not too big of a deal. I mean, if they're going for 2 shots, then you're going for 2 shots for 1 energy. And it's not like you can max potion and then do it, because you actually need to keep the damage counters on you. So yeah, I think all around it's just very, very bad.
Yeah, unfortunately, this card feels really weird to me. It's just a mishmash of different things. It's got a really, really mediocre attack, then a big attack, and then a discarding energy attack. It's just really, really weird. I think without a doubt the best way to play this will be this Magikarp and Shining Celebi engine. Dreadstorm GX actually kind of not guarantees, but improves your matchup against these energy spread decks like Turbo, Dark, and Xerneas, which is really, really nice. But like, if in general, I don't think you should be playing this card. I think there are much better. Like, Volk is a better water deck right now than Gyarados, and it's a fire type. So like, if you want to play water, you should probably be playing Volk anyway. So unfortunately, it just doesn't quite hit the mark. And yeah, it just feels like a real mishmash of a card. A lot of the GXs we've seen so far, I feel, have kind of fit the theme of what the Pokemon is. Whereas I can see sort of Draconic Disaster fitting the Gyarados theme, but Waterfall and Dreadstorm GX feel very, very weird on this card. So yeah, unfortunately, I think Gyarados has kind of been undersold over the past few years. Stormfront was where it last, in my mind, was a good card, but the Ancient Origins one was also pretty good. But yeah, the GX Gyarados has unfortunately, I think, been undersold this time. Next up, we have Alolan Golem GX, another card that is kind of just too expensive. It's another of these cards that also has not that much text on it. It has got 250 HP, which is bonkers. That is a lot of HP. Weak to fighting, though, and as we've said earlier in the video, fighting does seem to be getting a little bit of support in this set in 1 or 2 different ways. So it's not a particularly awful weakness to have, but it's not a particularly good one either. Yeah, then we've got for Lightning Colorless, Hammer In does 80. Again, no text. These are GX cards. Pokemon, we want text on these cards. It feels very weird to just be talking about the sort of ultra rares of the set that just do such basic effects. For lightning colors, we have Super Electromagnetic Tackle doing 200 and dealing 50 to yourself. Again, I think this card probably could have just dealt 200 and it still wouldn't be particularly competitive. The fact that you're dealing 50 to yourself takes you down to 200 HP, and that's a lot more manageable. And then when thinking about Guardy, considering you've got 4 energy on you, Guardy just needs to find 3 energy or 2 in a choice band, and they're able to respond KO. You need a choice band on yourself to one-shot a Guardy anyway. So yeah, it's really, really weird that Pokemon decided to make this card do 50 recall damage to itself, and even without taking that 50 recall damage, it still potentially wouldn't have been particularly playable. But even so, it's pretty interesting that it's unfortunate that it's still another card that is kind of dictated by how poor it sort of performs against Guardy. Finally, Heavy Rock GX, for the same cost, 2 lightning and 2 colorless, does 100 damage, and your opponent can't play cards from their hand during their next turn. This is actually a really interesting GX attack. Unfortunately, because it's on a stage 2, it's kind of anti-synergistic. I think this is really, really good early game, because it can actually kind of guarantee an early 2 prizes. In the late game, your opponent's going to have a board set up. So unless you're getting a knockout with Heavy Rock GX, a lot of the time it's not going to be a particularly relevant effect in the late game, I don't think, because they're going to just be able to respond with announcing an attack themselves anyway. And for 4 energy, Heavy Rock doing 100 damage isn't an efficient enough number to win just an attacking war. So I actually think the attack is better in the early game, which is unfortunate because it costs 4 energy on a stage 2, meaning that you probably have to run things like Raikou and Electrode, as you can see there. And at that point, it just feels like a very, very clunky sort of engine to just try and get a cheeky, easy 2 prizes, a bit of a meme with Heavy Rock, because you're still then going to have to take another 4 prizes in some other way. Super Electromagnetic Tackle will probably take 2, but you're then going to have to set up another Alolan Golem GX to be able to take the last 2, and that's 8 energy across 2 stage 2s without any particularly good way of accelerating. Like, obviously we have Raikou and stuff, but it's not the best way of accelerating. Electro gives up prizes. There's just no real perfect way of setting up Alolan Golem to the point where you can abuse this Heavy Rock or electromagnetic tackle attack, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think Heavy Rock is definitely by far the coolest mechanic that hasn't really been introduced to Pokemon before. I think it's really, really awesome that literally your opponent just can't do anything. They have to have a board ready to deal with a 250 HP Pokemon. So in theory, I could see Alolan Golem getting to 3 prize cards, then winning by doing the combination of Heavy Rocking a non-EX, and then they can't respond on a 250 HP Pokemon, and then you electromagnetic tackle for 200. With a choice band, you're probably KOing everything. So, especially because they can't like end you out of game, so you can just Guzma something the next turn and just win. So it would be great if this card could do anything to take the first 3 prize cards. It just can't. It can't get to the point where it can win the game because you've already lost the game because you're just terrible in every other department. So many downsides to this card, but Heavy Rock, if you get to 3 prize cards, you win the game. But you just can't do that. You just can't get that far, even with sacrificing like Electrodes to get you there, attaching DCEs, trying your hardest. It just won't work. And yeah, its weakness is horrible. It's got so many horrible attributes. It's so sad because its GX attack otherwise could have been nutty for the format. I think it's really cool GX attack, but unfortunately it's let down by the rest of the text. Next up is going to be Gengar, and also a quick note on the Haunter. The Haunter itself actually might be the more playable of the cards here. It has for a Psychic Energy Pain Amplifier, putting 2 counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. You know us, we've tried Gengar Coco before, and having an extra spread card is actually pretty cool. And when you're playing Cocos already, that Pain Amplifier will often always work. So you have a potential other target that can do flying flips, which is pretty cool. Gengar also gains counter energy, so potentially that deck gets a couple of buffs here and there. But looking at the stage 2, the new one, it has the ability Eroding Curse. Whenever your opponent attaches an energy card from their hand to one of their Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So it is the Frozen City. I want to say Frozen City. Is that the name of the stadium?
I think so, yeah.
Frozen City Stadium, but now in a stage 2. Frozen City saw sparing play, and I remember playing it myself in a few tournaments, and it was pretty cool at times when there were Rain Dance decks around. But overall, to commit a stage 2 to this sort of approach is just not enough of a payoff. We've seen it with Ampharos in the past. Bear in mind that Ampharos did have to be active, whereas the Gengar could chill on the bench to give you more damage, which is potentially a lot better, but it's in increments of 2 rather than 3. So I'm not sure if 2 damage counters is enough to get working, and also I can't see a deck that can use like a basic attacker just swinging in the active whilst having a Gengar in the back to increase the damage enough to win the game. I think you would have to have multiple Gengars out, which is already hard. And if you're able to set up multiple Gengars, you may as well be playing, better stage 2 decks, which we have many of. So I feel like he's just really not good enough. His attack is also really garbage. So thumbs up for the new Haunter. That could help out Gengar Coco for the memes. But the new Gengar seems to be under the line of playability.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's just a pre-release card, really. It's nothing too major. Obviously, the ability is potentially really strong, especially with Guardy in the format. That's a really good ability against Guardy. But the problem is, you're a stage 2 and they're a stage 2, but they're a better stage 2, so they're going to win that. Even with you eroding, cursing their Guardies, even with like 3 or 4 energy, their stage 2 still has more HP than your stage 2. So, it's never really going to work out ideally. I think, like you say, the most notable part is the Haunter plus counter energy potential for Gengar Coco. It's certainly something that we'll be trying on stream, but I think overall, Gengar just falls below the line of play just because it's, even in a format where stage 2s are now playable, it just falls. It's just too slow and too unimpactful. In the rest of the rest of the card isn't impactful enough for it to actually sort of make its way onto the scene in this format at the moment, which is unfortunate because it's been a while since we've seen a good Gengar card as well. But yeah, it's just not quite good enough, unfortunately. Next up, we have Mismagius, which has a very, very similar, well, pretty much an identical attack to Giratina EX. It's got Chaos Wheel for a single Psychic Energy rather than 4 energy on Giratina, so that's an immediate buff. Only just 30 damage though, which is unfortunate. It's whether this sort of effect of locking tools, special energy, and stadium cards is strong enough in today's format. It could potentially be, as I've mentioned already, there are a lot of specials out right now. There's a couple of stadium cards, and tools are incredibly relevant. Choice Band is in almost all decks right now. Float stones are huge as well. So Chaos Wheel is actually a really, really strong effect and an attack to have. Obviously, it's on a stage 1, so it's slower potentially than Giratina. Whether that sort of trade-off of 4 energy is better than having to wait a turn to evolve is worth it. We'll have to wait and see. But it is worth noting that we do indeed have Chaos Wheel back in the format. Could potentially be paired with Garb as well. Obviously, any Psychic type naturally sort of gets a screening from to see whether it can be paired with Garb, and I think that's probably the best way to play Mismagius, if anyway. It's the second attack for Psychic. DC does Black Magic does 20 damage, times the number of cards in the opponent's hand, which is really nice. Which has really nice synergy with Chaos Wheel actually, because if they're not able to play 3 different types of cards, they're likely to have a bigger hand size, especially when paired with Garbatoxin as well. They're not going to be able to play their ability cards either, or they're not going to want to. They're not going to be inclined to. So Black Magic could actually get into some pretty nice numbers, but roughly sort of the biggest hand size you'll see is 6, 7, 8 cards. That's doing between 120 and 160. With a Choice Band, that's 190 with 8 cards in hand. 8 cards isn't seen a lot. Obviously, people are ending themselves. People are sycamoring and playing cards. So 8 cards is still quite a lot to have in hand. And 190 is sort of the baseline to be able to start doing relevant numbers, I think. But that being said, this card could see play simply because Chaos Wheel saw play in the past on Giratina. It did indeed have a good ability and was a basic as well, but even so, We may see some Chaos Wheel back in the format. I think pairing it with Garb is easily the best way to, or the most obvious way to play this card right now.
Yeah, I think Chaos Wheel has highest implications in Expanded, just because there are quad DC decks with the Zoroark, and there's Night March, and there's Toad variants as well. Chaos Wheel is really good, and the fact that you can do it on one energy, especially a Psychic Energy, where Garbodor is already insane and Expanded, Mismagius could be good. I think its damage output is probably too low for Standard. Black Magic, I like the synergy there. Also, it incentivizes the opponent to play cards, and incentivizing them to play cards often means they're playing trainer cards, which is really good for your Trashalanche. So I like that they play off each other well. Unfortunately, I think its cost is just too much. Maybe if it was just DCE, it could be good. Then it would probably be a really good card, actually. But yeah, I think it's just a little bit too slow for Standard right now. But I think Chaos Wheel in Expanded is just on a much higher power level. So having an extra Chaos Wheeler is pretty cool.
Yeah.
On to Chimecho. It is a basic 70 HP Psychic Pokemon. Again, one of these dudes that can just slap a Psychic Energy on, and we know that there are some very relevant decks playing basic Psychic Energy, most notably Drampa Garbodor, and there's also a handful of Rainbow Energy decks that also could benefit from this little guy. He does a very cheeky 10 damage, and your opponent can't play Pokemon with abilities from their hand during their next turn. Very harsh. There are some decks that completely rely on evolving into ability-focused Pokemon. Gardevoir, even the Gallade, even the Octillery, can't evolve into any of those. That's a bit of a problem. Metagross can't evolve into their Metagross. Decidueye obviously can't evolve Zoroark. And also your opponent can't even put Tapu Leles onto the board because it's anything from their hand. So, yeah, you actually cover a lot of things with this. I think overall the damage isn't good enough to be worthwhile, but I think this could be a headache. My biggest thing would be, like, because you're doing such little damage, you're using this really to stall. And right now, there's not many reasons why you'd want to stall. Maybe if Decidueye goes back to Rainbow Energies, you could actually play this in Decidueye to try and slow down other decks. But I think you've already beat, like, Gardevoir just because you have the Devolve package. Maybe this stops your opponent being able to put a Garbodor into play so that you always have your abilities online. That could be really funny. But yeah, I think in terms of stalling, it doesn't really make much sense to play it in Drampagard because you have better, like, stall plays, I guess you could go for, just by doing different bits of chip damage with Drampa himself, or just going for a big wheel on turns you don't want to go for damage. So I think he's interesting, cool, yes, but I don't think there's too many applications for this card.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Unfortunately, the deck that this fits in the most, Drampagarb, actually has two better attackers to be using if you want to go for sort of stall plays. You've got Drampa, like you say, doing Righteous Edge or Big Wheel, and you've actually even got Acid Spray Trubbish, which can be really, really annoying. And sometimes that's just as annoying as not being able to play abilities. I was literally playing today against someone whose whole strategy was just to Acid Spray me, and it was much more annoying than being able to not play cards from my hand because it meant I had to always dig for energy. And, you know, there's just better options in the natural fit for where Chimecho could be. But yeah, I do like the idea of if Decidueye goes back to Rainbows, of throwing this guy in. It's like when Sableye was released, everyone was like, oh, we can use Rainbow Energy and Decidueye and use Sableye as like a lock thing. Well, this kind of works as a bit of a lock thing as well, but actually it is much more relevant. Like, even the 10 HP more is a little bit more relevant, and just doing damage is even better. So, you know, that's probably the only situation we're going to see Decidueye. We're going to see Chimecho in Decidueye. But it's definitely a really, really fun little attack to have. And when you think about it, this covers a lot of cards in the format right now. Stopping your opponent from playing Lele for the rest of the game just because of a 70 HP basic is really, really funny when you think about it. So yeah, it's definitely worth considering. But I think, unfortunately, the natural fit for the card, or the natural deck that this card fits in, just has better options already. Onto another GX, we've got Nihilego GX. One of these Ultra Beast GXs. We still haven't seen too much support for the Ultra Beasts, but I'm almost 100% certain we will see something when Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon come out, considering we're getting another 5 Ultra Beasts in that set. So, you know, this will be important at some point. But for now, we've got 180 HP Psychic type, weak to Psychic as well, which is pretty unfortunate. It means that Garbodor only needs three items in your discard plus a Choice Band to one-shot you, which is unfortunate. But it's going to be rare that you're using this guy as an attacker anyway, so if they're taking a prize on the bench, they're not knocking out your attacker, so there's pros and cons to it. The ability, Nihilistic Light or Empty Light. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, both active Pokemon are now poisoned and confused. This is actually one of the most important parts of the card, if not the most important, because it's we've finally got a way of being able to trigger special conditions quite quickly. As you can see, we've got some really good partners for the ability right here. We've got Raticate Break. Obviously, that lost Ariados in rotation. Now we have a way of being able to poison our opponent again. Plus, we can evolve out of it, whereas in the same way that we could evolve out of Ariados, so it's not like you're stuck with the condition as well. So yeah, you can now play Raticate Break again. Unfortunately, again, it is a Stage 2 deck, and there probably are better Stage 2 decks out there. But still, we have Darkrai GX. I think this is probably the best way to abuse this ability. In combination with Dead End GX, just guaranteeing a knockout is really, really strong at any point in the game. As long as you're able to, considering you can restore one energy onto Darkrai anyway, you can actually get a knockout for technically only 2 attachments. And in the kind of deck that you're going to be playing this combo in, you're going to be playing elixirs anyway. So this can actually come out of nowhere, which is really, really nice. And then obviously there is some synergy with Alolan Muck as well for the memes. Chemical Breath doing 150 damage if you've used your ability, which is 180 with a Choice Band. Again, it's for 3 energy, but 220 HP is a pretty nice number to have, and being able to hit 180 isn't bad at all. So yeah, there's definitely some combinations for the ability. Overall, the 2 attacks aren't particularly useful. For 3 Psychic, Lockup does 120 damage and stops your opponent from retreating. It's good in combination with the ability if you're playing multiple of the GX, but we have Guzma and Acerola in format right now, so overall the effect isn't too important. And Symbiont GX for 3 Psychic again, as the 2 top cards of your opponent's deck to their prize cards. Initially, I read this attack as basically do nothing, but Joe's kind of convinced me that it actually can be relevant in the late stages of the game if you are able to get 3 Psychic Energy on to this guy. Obviously, if you're able to combo this with a late game N, it can actually be really, really devastating because your opponent goes down to 2 cards in hand and then back up to 4 prizes as well. You can't really use this attack in the early game because it doesn't progress your board state at all. So you put 2 extra prizes on your opponent's board, but then they're able to respond and take those 2 prizes anyway without any detriment really, because you're just giving them a turn to do so. But in the late game, it can be pretty annoying to deal with. But overall, I don't think you're particularly going to use this guy for the GX attack at all. I think the ability is where this card shines, and I think this will see play in Darkrai variants, especially in Expanded.
Yeah, definitely in Expanded. It's a big buff to the Malamar EX that you had to play. The only downside is that you can't find it with a Hooper, but its ability is far superior to the Malamar. I think you're right, its attacks are just too expensive. I like the actual applications of Symbiont GX, but I think just because it's so badly costed, and because you only really want to set it up for the GX attack, because Lockup itself doesn't do enough. Maybe if it had another decent attack that you can actually power up for the sake of swinging with it, then its GX attack becomes much better. But yeah, 3 Psychic is an ugly cost, so pretty much just read it as its ability most of the time. Muck is cool. I think with like scoop ups and stuff, Muck could be pretty dangerous. I think it never worked with Salazzle, but that was because you had constant 2 stage 1s that you're trying to set up. Now it's much less so the case, and Muck with 220 HP and Psychic Resist is really cool. Fighting Weakness is a problem though, so yeah, who knows. Nihilego, definitely a cool card. I just realised that I spelt that one wrong as well. I got the I and the E the wrong way around. Oh well. This is a rough cut today. Man, let's just keep moving on. Okay, time for Buzzwole GX. Big old Buzzwole. A lot of people hyped about this card. Because he is a throwback to Landorus EX, a very powerful EX Pokemon that both me and Jack loved throughout its career. It's a very aggressive early game attacker that also has late game beat stick potential as well. And Landorus saw a lot of play for a long time. So simply throwing back to that card, there's a lot of promise for Buzzwole. He is a 190 HP fighting type. Ultra Beast, once again, we have to mention the tag, even though it's not relevant just yet. It could be more relevant in the future. And it has Psychic Weakness. This is the big downside of Buzzwole. We'll just cover it straight away. Being weak to Garbodor is a problem, and you're also weak to Espeon as well. These are fairly relevant types, and that is a worry for sure. But we do have other fighting Pokemon that you can maybe play in your deck to cover the weakness and simply not get Buzzwole out against the Garbodor builds. So as long as you use Buzzwole early and don't play a bunch of items in the early 2 or 3 turns, he can still get value even against Garbodor builds because he's so efficient in the early turns regardless. And then if you just spend your next few turns attaching to other Pokemon that aren't weak to Psychic, you could still be fine. So don't be 100% put off just because it says Psychic ×2 in the bottom left corner. He's still a very good card in my opinion. Let's look at his first attack. This is the big selling point in my eyes. For a single fighting energy, Jet Punch does 30 damage and also deals 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. This is really, really good, especially in a format where there is plenty of stage 1 and 2 Pokemon that evolve from 60 HP little basics, dealing oftentimes 2-hit KOs on the bench and sometimes the active. You can even get knockouts on the active because this 30 damage isn't the full story when you're a fighting type. We still have strong energy in the format. We have Fighting Fury Belt, which means you could go to 60-30 on the first turn, even on low HP Pokemon. You also have Regirock EX that could push that even further. And we have Choice Band as well, if you want to go for more aggressive routes on basic EX and GX Pokemon, if the format is rife with those. So Jet Punch can actually be doing 80, 90 plus damage depending on Regirock support. So yeah, that's insane damage that you can just plonk on the board for 1 energy. It means that Buzzwole is potentially Acerola-able, especially if you play a Fury Belt build, going up to that much HP and just committing 1 energy on your own side and putting a huge shift of damage on the board is just so insane. So really, really efficient for its first attack, and that is the selling point of him, really. But it continues to look good if you go for an Elixir-style build, where you could use Knuckle Impact for 3 fighting energy. You deal 160, and this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. Obviously, that's the same as Volcanion and Lapras and a few other attackers out there. But we don't have to be too concerned about that when there's Guzma, and I've already mentioned Acerola. And you can just move him out anyway with switch cards. You should be fine to get away with Knuckle Impacts, and most of the time you'll do it just for 1 big knockout regardless. 160 again, not the end of the story if you can add in Strongs and Choice Bands. So this is a big 1-hit KO attack as well. So you have good early game pressure, you have late game pressure as well when they start powering up their dudes. And I think the biggest downside of the card is the GX attack is pretty mediocre. Absorption GX does 40 times the amount of your remaining prize cards. And in the early game, Buzzwole is very, very strong. So you want to be taking the early aggression if you are a Buzzwole deck. So there's a bit of anti-synergy there. I think if you're setting up 3 energy, you're more than likely just using the normal attack. Just because Jet Punch will net you so many prizes so often. So many aspects of Buzzwole, but he just looks really good overall.
Yeah, I think the card is insane. And actually, I was also undersold on the GX attack until I started testing it literally today. But actually just using Absorption GX as a Knuckle Impact style attack, but you don't have the worry of having to cycle or find a way of moving Buzzwole the next turn, is still completely fine. Being able to Jet Punch your first 2 prizes, then Absorption for 160 is fine because with Fury Belt and Strong Energy, as Joe said, you can push it into another knockout, and then you're going to be doing the same amount of damage with Knuckle Impact the turn after. So actually, whilst it is definitely the worst of the 3 attacks, it's still completely fine to use in the mid game. It just is anti-synergistic when it comes to in the early game where you want to be really applying pressure with Jet Punch, because it's essentially what the card does. It's so strong. especially if even if you're going second. Like a lot of the time, when you have that coin flip, you're like, oh, I'm not going first. I'm at a disadvantage. And actually, sometimes Buzzwole wants to be going second just to get that extra turn of jet punching in, because it's going to mean just an extra 30-30 that you're able to use to your advantage with Miraculous Shine the next or later on in the game. And as you can see, there's so many partners for Buzzwole. This just scratches the surface, really. There's so many things going on with Buzzwole, both in mine and Joe's head right now. We've got Garb as sort of ability lock plus a late game attacker, which is pretty nice. Obviously, Espeon is going to be in pretty much every single one of your Buzzwole builds anyway. Zygarde is another of these fighting types that isn't weak to Psychic, so that sort of counters or means that you don't just auto lose to Garb. It means that you have a strong attacker against Garb. Muck is another one that we're trying and considering as an ability lock if you don't want to play sort of a Garb as a secondary attacker. Lycanroc is another fighting type that's does a huge amount of damage with its GX attack, and has a much better GX attack than Buzzwole itself. So you can sort of apply that early pressure in the early game, and then take a big knockout late game with Dangerous Rogue, as well as having Bloodthirsty Eyes as an ability, which is really, really strong to be able to just even take these Jet Punch prizes even easier, so you can actually access what you've been damaging on the bench. And then finally, obviously we have Bats. We don't have Crobat anymore, but Landorus Bats was a very good archetype back in the day, even in the format where Landorus itself had a weakness to one of the best decks in the game. It was Arceus or Blastoise Keldeo. Even when that was in the format, Landorus Bats, still did well. So that's why you kind of have to look at this weakness. Yes, you are going to take a huge hit from Garb, but that being said, you don't actually it doesn't mean you need to write off the card at all. And actually, this is, I think, probably my favorite card of the set overall. It's so reminiscent of Landorus and just so powerful in a format where there's so many 60 HP basics that evolve into higher HP stuff. We've already seen this Devolve combo do well in general. It's splashed in a lot of decks right now. So just having a good, strong GX to complement that is really, really good. And yeah, I think just because it's so reminiscent of Landorus itself is why I love the card. So yeah, I'm definitely really, really happy with Buzzwole in the format right now. Next up, we have Hydreigon. Unfortunately, it is only a 1-star card, but it does indeed have a really interesting ability, Sift Out. Once during a turn, you may discard benched Pokemon and all the cards attached to them until you have 3 Pokemon on your bench. It's a really, really interesting ability, sorry. Very similar to Parallel City's blue-sided effect. It means that you're lowering your own bench. You can't lower your opponent's bench, but that doesn't matter because you're able to get rid of things like damaged Pokemon or Lele's or things like that to be able to make space for more attackers. So the ability is really, really cool, but unfortunately the card just isn't very good. The ability isn't particularly good on a Stage 2 Pokemon that you have to set up. It's going to take 2 or 3 turns to be able to sort of really get this ability out, which is unfortunate. So that means Hydreigon unfortunately won't see any play, but the ability is really, really strong and really, really useful. We've seen this style of not ability, but as an attack on Mega Gardevoir, which obviously loved denying the opponent's prizes, getting rid of Shaymins, getting rid of Hoopers, all of that good stuff. So yeah, obviously we know the ability's good. It's just unfortunate that it's on Stage 2. It can't really be used to full effect.
Yeah, it's a big shame. I really like the ability. As you said, with Despair Ray, you're able to cash in on so many good, one-of usage abilities multiple times in a game. So reusing Lele's, Dragoniting to find yourself, even the new Kartana could be a big deal. There's a few Pokemon that are really good when you simply play them on the board. Even the new Nihilego, for example. These are great abilities that you could spam over and over again thanks to Hydreigon. It's a Parallel City style effect that we've seen be played recently, only for yourself though, but it's great for taking off liabilities on your bench. So it's an amazing ability. It's just such a shame that it's on a pretty much useless Stage 2. So let's move on to Meme Lord GX, the pre-release menace himself. He is a 210 HP Dark type Pokemon, weak to fighting, which is awkward now that we've talked about Buzzwole and how much we love him. He does have Psychic Resist, which is nice, however. He has a big, chunky 4 retreat cost. What do you expect? Look at the guy. He is someone who likes to eat sloppily. That's the name of his first attack. Discarding the top 5 cards of your deck. If any of those cards are energy cards, attach them to this Pokemon. So he is essentially, in theory, self-accelerating. But discarding cards on the top of your deck is, in general, quite bad for decks. There are a few synergistic cards like Darkrai GX, and obviously whenever you hit a Dark Energy, you're super happy. But you're getting rid of resources, and a lot of the time you can't stack your top 5 cards. There aren't many abilities or anything like that that can help you out too much. So there's no real way to guarantee Darkness energies on the top, so you could end up just getting rid of a bunch of supporters and useful item cards, and that's going to be sad for you. The alternative, of course, is to play a bunch of energy, going to like 20 Dark. I know a lot of pre-release people literally just play 39 Darkness and just set him up, but pre-release is very different from real decks, and it seems like a Guzzlord isn't going to be enough to just win you the game on his own in a real tournament. So yeah, his attack costs are huge though. Tyrannical Hole for 5 energies deals 180. Again, there's no text on it. And his GX attack for 5 darkness does 100 damage. However, if your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this attack, you take 2 more prize cards. So you see a little 60 HP Vulpix and you take 3 prize cards off it. That's going to be pretty crazy. But how on earth did you get 5 energies onto him? This is the question. How do you commit that much energy to a Guzzlord? Even if you are taking that amount of prize cards, it baffles me that you're going to be able to do this and then set up other stuff throughout the game. It just doesn't make sense. We've seen Umbreon EX had the extra prize style attack in endgame. Obviously, Guzzlord does more damage and it's less situational than Umbreon was. But in my eyes, it's a similar deal, that just like it's so much commitment into an attack that isn't doing good damage. So you either have to set it up for a 2-hit KO with something else. And if you've set up multiple things when one of the things is a 5 energy Guzzlord, I'm going to be super impressed. So that doesn't really seem possible. So it feels like you need to do a greedy Guzma play and just take out something just useless on the opponent's bench, just like a little stage 1 that's trying to evolve, like a Curlier or something. So yeah, it's greedy in every sense of the card. Its early attack is really greedy and will hurt your setup and makes you build a bad list. And then its other attacks are just super expensive and overall just really not good enough in my eyes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that one of the coolest Pokemon out of Sun and Moon unfortunately kind of got screwed over with its GX. I think one of the only ways to actually play this card is shoving it in Turbo Dark and sticking an EXP share on it and trying to get a cheeky 3 prize knockout towards the end of the game. But other than that, I just don't see where this card fits. It's obviously been a huge meme all over the Facebook groups and stuff. With pre-releases, turns out it actually loses to a Regirock, which is in the boxes, so that's unfortunate. So even in pre-releases, it can be countered, which is pretty sad. But yeah, it's unfortunate that Guzzlord currently doesn't have any practical applications. The only thing that I wanted to the only thing that I want to say about this card is looking at all of the Ultra Beasts that we've had. A lot of them have very heavy specific type energy costs. Things like Pheromosa, all of the energy had to be specifically grass. Celesteela is one of the only ones that has a lot of colorless in it, and that makes me think if we do ever get some kind of Ultra Beast synergy, it will be based on energy, because you know that they can't justify putting 2-5 energy attacks on one Pokemon without at least having some kind of plan to give it some kind of energy acceleration, right? I don't know, but yeah, unfortunately, Guzzlord just doesn't hit the mark at all. You're never gonna feel safe with 5 energy on when Guardy is floating around in the format as well. And if you're planning on using Eat Sloppily to try and accelerate yourself into the game, you're going to have to have a very wacky deck to be able to do so anyway. To the point where I think most other decks will be more consistent than yours. So yeah, unfortunately, Guzzlord Takes an L in this set, but yeah, you know, it's a huge meme. So at least he got sort of one of the best meme cards we've had in a while. Next up, speaking of dealing with Guardy, we have Registeel, which actually seems to be one of the best ways to deal with Guardy. Very, very similar to Oblivion Wing Yveltal, has very, very similar stats. Both got 130 HP. This is a 130 HP metal type, however. Weak to fire. Can be quite relevant. Obviously, Baby Volk is probably the only Pokemon that is actually relevant for, but it doesn't mean Baby Volk only needs 2 Steam Ups to one-shot you. All of the other EXs and GXs in the deck are knocking you out anyway, so it only really matters that Baby Volk changes its numbers. And because of the way Fury Belt and Choice Band work, actually they still need 2 Steam Ups either way. So you know, whilst its weakness is annoying because Volk is a good deck, it's actually not that relevant because they still have to commit a fairly sizable amount of resources anyway. So yeah, the weakness isn't all that important. Turbo Arm for 1 metal does 30 damage and attaches a basic energy from the discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Obviously very reminiscent, as I say, of Oblivion Wing Yveltal and the new Raikou we had in Shining Legends. Essentially, it's just another Oblivion Winger with a good typing, which is really, really nice. Being able to use this in the early turns to one-shot things like Routses and then Curliers with a Fury Belt is really, really nice to be able to accelerate at the same time. You can see what you could be accelerating towards. On the right there, we've got Celesteela, as we mentioned earlier, Silvally, which we will go over later, and Zoroark as well, which actually only has specific energy types in its GX attack anyway, so you can trade away your energy and then attach them back to Zoroark if you want to, or attach them back to other metal attackers that you're running anyway, which is really, really nice. Iron Fist for Metal Colorless does 90 damage, and if Regice is on your bench, heals 30 damage from this Pokemon. Regice shouldn't ever be on your bench, so that text is kind of irrelevant. What isn't irrelevant is the fact that this does 90 damage, which means with a Choice Band, you're doing 120, and against the Guardy, that's 240, which is indeed more than 230. So being able to one-shot a Guardy for 3 energy on a non-EX, it actually isn't that bad. It is 3 energy, but given that you have inbuilt acceleration, whilst it's not to yourself, it can be to other Registeels. It means that this actually is one of the best Guardy counters we've had, hence it's got its 3-star rating. Simply for that, really. I think this is possibly one of the best, possibly the best Guardy counter we have in the format when paired with a couple of other cards that we're going to talk about later. But yeah, just having another sort of type coverage for Oblivion Wing is really, really nice. Oblivion Wing has been relevant pretty much all the way through its career. It's pretty much only not particularly relevant right now, simply because Dark isn't a great type to be. And even in the Dark decks that do see play, they do play Oblivion Wing. Things like Turbo Dark has always played Oblivion Wing. Yveltal has always played Oblivion Wing. So yeah, it's just a good card to have, and it just happens to also be able to deal with Guardy really, really well.
Yeah, really good type, really good early game pressure, deals with Sylveon quite nicely as well. Even putting a Choice Band on Sylveon, you can do 120 turn 1 if they Energy Evolution. That's really insane. You can KO Ralts and Vulpix as well. Vulpix being seen in a lot of different lists just for helping you set up if you're a Stage 2 deck. So yeah, still really good typing. It is notable that you can play Psychic Ralts that have weakness to Psychic, but Drampagard right now is playing Espeon GX, so maybe you play like a split of your Ralts if you're going to be playing Guardy. So yeah, maybe that's something to be concerned about. If Registeel does get too insane, you could go to Psychic Ralts just to have a different weakness. But yeah, I really like the early acceleration. I like the package that you could try and throw into these sort of colorless attacking decks like Sylveon, like Zoroark, just to try and swing, you know, one of the more important matchups. So hopefully we'll be seeing some Registeel in London, because I want to see him do well, just because I love these Oblivion Wing style attacks. I think they're just really good for the game in general, and getting acceleration early on in the game is just really nice, just in general for getting set up. On to Kartana GX. This is a very interesting one. Another Ultra Beast tag thrown in there just for good measure. It's a 170 HP Metal type, and this has the ability Cut Down. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, discard a special energy from your opponent's Pokemon. So it is Enhanced Hammer, but now in the form of when you play this down onto your board, you get the effect. So there's a few advantages to being a Kartana in comparison to an Enhanced Hammer. There's also a few downsides. So firstly, you're not an item card, so you're not improving Treasure Launch damage, which is cool. Secondly, because you're a Pokemon, you're much more searchable. You can use Ultra Ball to find it. Even something like Pokemon Fan Club could find you a Kartana to put to hand, and then you simply put it down. So it's much more reliable to get it on the turns where it will be most useful. So that is very excellent for you. However, being a Pokemon means that he fills your bench, which is potentially awkward for you if you want to have room for other attackers, or if your bench is already full, you can't simply play the Kartana down. And also there's Ability Lock, and Ability Lock is around a lot right now. Ironically enough, most of the decks that are playing Special Energy, they're actually playing Ability Lock as well. So Kartana may not be targeting the decks that you're trying to target in the same way that Enhanced Hammer is. So there's a few things to be concerned about when you're trying to choose Kartana over Enhanced Hammer. I think one of the cool things of Kartana is you'll only ever play one copy, because you can play things like Rescue Stretcher to get value in games where he will be useful, whereas Enhanced Hammer oftentimes isn't enough as a one copy. So for that reason, maybe Kartana sees play over it. It does also have a couple of attacks, and again, it's a metal Pokemon, so you always have to consider it. Metal, colorless deals just 70 with Gale Cut, so even with Choice Band, you're not getting one-hit KOs with, against Guardy, which is a big deal. You can try and buff it. There's a few things like Delmise and such, but I don't feel like that would be worth it to go for a Kartana heavy attacking deck. You do get to shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached into your deck, and that's on a choice as well. You don't have to, you can. So in theory, if he tanks a hit somehow, you can maybe recycle him, but that would seem like a very rare occasion. So I think you'll rarely ever use Gale Cut. But it does also have, for a single Metal Energy, Blade GX, which simply states, take a prize card. Now, we said earlier with Xurkitree that it's really good to use early GX attacks, because it could activate Hala. I don't think you'll ever be playing enough Kartana to consistently go for early Blade GXs, even though it is a single energy cost. So maybe that's a bit of an issue, if you're going to go for like a Hala approach. And also, I'm not certain how good this GX attack actually is. Oftentimes, there's multiple things that happen when you traditionally take prize cards. If you take a knockout, you're not only taking a prize card, you're also taking a card from your opponent's board and affecting it. You're dealing with a Pokemon at the same time. So they lose, basically, part of their setup. And that's a big deal. A lot of people see the Blade GX and think it's really good just because it's an instant prize. And I agree that in spots where you're literally one prize away from game, you can guarantee it with one energy. That is really good. But for like an early tempo play, it's really bad. I don't think it's all that helpful. So Kartana, amazing for its cut down ability, but I think that's where it ends pretty much, other than very niche spots for the GX attack.
Yeah, I think the ability is where you're going to be using this card, if anything. It's weird that Blade GX actually, as take a prize card, is better in the late game than the early game. But like you say, being able to guarantee a win on board by just attaching an energy to a Kartana or two and just leaving them on the board is a relevant way of being able to win the game. But yeah, just having a searchable E-Hammer could be potentially really, really devastating for your opponent. It's just how good or how useful this discard mechanic is as an ability, when, as you say, a lot of the decks that are running Special Energy right now are also running Garbodor. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting card, kind of synergistic, but kind of also anti-synergistic with itself. But I think it definitely will see some kind of play somewhere in the format, just because E-Hammer is slowly creeping back into decks as a card to not only deal with these things like Drampa Garb and Espeon Garb, but also deal with Gardevoir as well. So yeah, this could be the replacement for E-Hammer, as you say, running Rescue Stretcher and Ultra Balls anyway in every single deck. It's just going to mean that you may as well be playing a single Kartana over 2 EE Hammers instead. Next up, we have Alolan Exeggutor GX, which is another sort of meme in the set. It's unfortunately just really underwhelming. It's a dragon type, which obviously it's really cool that they did decide to give this guy the dragon typing, but unfortunately it does indeed mean it's weak to fairy, which obviously is such a huge downside, potentially even worse than being weak to psychic right now, as being weak to fairy, meaning that Guardy only needs 4 energy on it, or 3 in a choice band, or sort of between you and Alolan Exeggutor. Sorry, between the Guardy and the Alolan Exeggutor. And unfortunately, Alolan Exeggutor's attacks do indeed cost 4 energy, which is pretty awkward. The first attack, Tropical Head, does only cost 1 grass though, dealing 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to Alolan Exeggutor to one of the opponent's Pokemon. On sort of initial thoughts, this actually could be a really cool snipe, but the more you think about it, the relevant snipes are sort of 100 to 120 damage. That's kind of where you want to be, and that means you need 5 or 6 energy on Alolan Exeggutor, which just isn't happening. It's like the Guzzlord thing, except this is a stage 1 as well, so it's even more difficult to set up. So unfortunately, Tropical Head is very unlikely to be doing particularly good things. With 3 energy, you can knock out baby sort of routes and things like that on the bench, which is cool. But I don't think that's ever going to be particularly useful. I don't think there's going to be many routes. And Curlier, by the time you've got 3 or 4 energy onto Alolan Exeggutor, which is unfortunate. Obviously, we do have Venusaur to help with that, but again, you're then running a stage 1 and a stage 2, and that is a pretty clunky sort of deck overall. 4 grass, 3 colorless, Dragon Hammer does 120 and confuses your opponent's Pokemon. Simply, 4 energy for 120 isn't good enough right now, especially when you're response KO'd immediately by a Guardy. 150 if they flip Confusion, 180 if they flip Confusion and you're running a Choice Band. That's where we're sort of seeing better numbers, but unfortunately that requires you to find a Choice Band, you to attach 4 energy, and you also to have them flip tails on their attack. So 50% of the time you're still not getting a knockout. So unfortunately, again, Dragon Hammer isn't quite good enough. The GX attack, for the same cost, Grass 3 colorless, Tower Go Round GX, does 180 damage. And much like Celesteela, this actually is a relevant amount for the amount of energy you put into it. And you can then rearrange your energy on your board, which is a really strong effect, especially if you're taking a knockout and you know you're going to be responded. It means that you can move all of your energy onto the bench and set up some more attackers for the following turns. Again, it's just unfortunate that this attack costs 4 energy, because it's going to mean it's quite a slow setup. By the time you've done this slow setup, your opponent's going to have taken some prizes, and you're perhaps not going to have enough time to be able to move all your energy off and get the benefit of being able to set up multiple attackers whilst not losing resources when Alolan Exeggutor goes down. So yeah, unfortunately, it's such a meme card, but it's just not good enough. The attacks aren't cost effective really, and the GX attack, whilst having a really strong effect because it's a GX attack, and because of how expensive it is, it's just not really practical to build a deck around this guy.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste more time on him. He's terrible. Let's move on to a much more interesting card, Silvally GX. Now, Jack said that Buzzwole's his favourite. This is where my vote goes. I am a huge fan of Silvally GX. I think this is going to be a card that really does enter the format and shake things up, but also has huge potential in the future as we see more power memories, or whatever they're called, the Silvally memory cards in the future. Yeah, I think this card is really insane. First of all, we'll go to the top of your screen where you can see the type null. This is its basic form, and having a 110 HP basic is really good. It means that you can play a stage 1 deck that is invulnerable to devolve approaches, and that's really big right now because every deck has to worry about devolve if they are in evolution, except for this one basically. So that is really awesome. Additionally, he has the attack Armor Press that does 30, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. So it helps you out again, remain a little bit safer, and also puts really important damage counters on the board actually, because 30 damage means that when you move into the Turbo Drive from Silvally, with a choice band either on the type Null or on the Silvally, means that you can go into 180 over 2 turns. So that's actually a really big deal. And the main pair we have with it is going to be Registeel and the Metal package at the moment, just because that's a really important type to be right now, because Guardi's everywhere. And also Registeel has an attack that can do 1 for 30. So again, you set up the Turbo Drive attack over 2 turns on 180 HP Pokemon, which is a really big deal. I really like that. Fighting weakness is a bit of an issue for the type Null and the Silvally, but you do have the Psychic Memory that can hit the Buzzwoles at least back with your own weakness, so at least it can cover it somewhat. And again, we can play other attackers to try and cover this. This is what's so awesome about the Silvally. He is all colorless, so you can tech him out based on the metagame you're expecting. Let's look at him a little bit in more detail now. 210 HP colorless as a stage 1. Pretty decent. It has the really nice ability Gyro Unit. Each of your basic Pokemon has no retreat cost. So the Registeel that would have had 3 retreat, the type Nulls that all have 2 retreat, and even other Pokemon that you can now splash into the deck with no real concern, because there's really no downside to having them on the board, because you know you can move out of them quite easily thanks to this ability. So it really opens the doors for things like Necrozma, for Drampa, for Magina EX to be one-ofs, because they'll never get trapped and they'll never really slow you down during the game as long as you have your abilities online, which is really, really good for you. It then has the attack Turbo Drive that I've already alluded to a little bit earlier. This is what reminds me of Manectric EX, the Mega. It is for 3 colorless energy, 120 damage, and you attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench. So you're not only getting easy 2-shots, and sometimes you're doing the early poke of the 30, and then Turbo Drive does 150, and you're doing your first 2 prizes of the game. You're also powering up other Silvally and other attackers on your board. So again, if you're up against Guardi, you can be powering up a Magina on the bench. If you're up against things like Volcanion, you can power up a Necrozma and then just do 100 to their entire board with the GX attack, and then finish them off with like a bunch of Lele's spamming over and over again. You can even set up Drampa just because it's overall a really good attacker. Berserk is really insane, and Righteous Edge is helpful throughout a bunch of different matchups. So having a bunch of these little one-offs could be really, really good, just because Gyro Unit allows you to do this, and Turbo Drive also means that you're constantly setting up multiple threats. It almost reminds me of Y-Cyclone quite a lot, actually, because you're sort of retaining energy with Y-Cyclone, whereas Turbo Drive is, you know, presenting the 3 energy, but also recovering 1, quote-unquote, because you're getting 1 from the discard pile at the same time. Obviously not quite as strong as Mega Man's, because it got 2 basics, and this is only 1, but when we have DCE cost anyway on the Silvally, it sort of does the same thing. So really nice 2-hit KO potential there, with 210 HP, really, really nice. And it also has the GX attack that is the same as the Lycanroc GX. It is Rebellion GX for, again, the 3 colorless cost, 50 times each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So oftentimes this is a big blow-up attack. Your opponent has to either play very, very cautiously with their own bench. Basically, they can't go for Lele Bridget plays. Or they just basically accept the fact that Silvally will take a big 1-hit KO during the game. So as I mentioned, the game plan with Silvally is going to be 30 damage on one of your starting Type Nulls or Registeel into Turbo Drive, which gets you your first 180. Then you have Rebellion that gets you 200 damage, and then you have to move on from there to take your last 2 with a combination of your other attackers. Maybe you're hitting for weakness with some of your power memory cards. Maybe you're hitting for weakness with being metal Pokemon or the other techs you have in there, or just in general going for a two-shot approach from then on will get you the game, because you're just consistently getting Pokemon out every single turn. When you have acceleration from Registeel, from DCE, and from Turbo Drive, you should never really run out of threats. So my goodness, what a powerful card already in the format that could potentially just get even more busted the more types he can obtain with these tool cards.
Yeah, it was interesting when we first saw these tool cards. Everyone was like, "Oh, are we going to get all of them?" And then we saw just getting these two, and we were like, "Oh, okay, so they've just picked a couple of types." Then about 3 weeks later, they decided that we're also getting fire and lightning type in the next set. So it will be interesting to see whether we actually get the full complement of all types. I actually don't know whether it will be particularly good for the format if we get all of the types, because it kind of means Silvally is inherently one of the best decks in format just because it can beat everything if it wants to. But it'll be interesting to see where they go with it. The card itself is obviously incredibly strong. Gyro Unit is an insanely good ability. And then being able to accelerate yourself with Turbo Drive is brilliant. This is one of the other cards I've done a lot of testing with from the set, and I've also fallen in love with this card as well. It was difficult for me to say Buzzwole was my favorite because Silvally is also a fantastic card. The fact that the Guardian matchup is relatively free if you're running metal attackers as your backup or as your type of choice is also really, really nice, especially going into a tournament where I feel Guardy has justified itself as the best deck in format right now. So yeah, going into that kind of tournament, knowing that you have a good Guardy matchup is just really, really strong. And the fact that you have access to so many other random colorless attackers just because you have inbuilt acceleration and DCEs and stuff, it just means that you should be able to cover a lot of matchups. And the matchups you don't cover, you have things like these memory cards to be able to sort of flip those into your favor as well. So I think even with just the two memory cards that we've been given, it's actually enough for Silvally to potentially be a good enough deck to make a break into tier 2 or even tier 1 just off the bat, because it can already beat some really, really strong archetypes. I think the only types that are slightly better to have as memory cards would be water and metal. So with metal, you wouldn't need to run the metal attackers because Silvally would do it for you. And with water, you would have a pretty free Volk matchup. But that being said, even so, I think fighting and psychic are two very, very important um, types to be right now. I think they're the third and the fourth most important types to be. And the fact that you have so much inbuilt acceleration while still being able to blow up anyone that bridgets is just really, really strong. So yeah, Silvally is without a doubt one of the best, if not the best, GX in the set, depending on whether you think Buzzwole is better or not. It's definitely up there in first or second place without a doubt. And there's so much access to these cards as well. There's obviously the three in the set that you can get, but there's also a box coming out, and it's also likely to come out in a tin at some point as well. So this card is really, really accessible as well, which is really, really nice because it just means that it's not going to be another Guardy or Lele where you actually have to pull it, or it's going to be a $20, $25 card. This should be a relatively cheap card as well, which is really, really good. Next up, we have Miltank, a card that it was one of the first cards revealed from Crimson Invasion. And obviously, as you can see right there, there is indeed a Gardevoir on the screen. Because the ability Moo Ale, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, when you attach an energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon, heal 90 damage from that Pokemon. That's really, really strong, especially when you consider Secret Spring triggers hand attachments. So therefore, with 2 or 3 Guardies out, you can be healing upwards of 300 damage per turn just on energy attachments, which is insane. Guardy lists have been seen to run Max Potion, have been seen to run Ace Roller in the past. Now you can just run one Moo Ale, Miltank, and some Floatstones, and that can be your energy, your healing option, which is nice. Sit Down Splash is pretty irrelevant overall. We're just looking at the ability. Another nice use is in Silvally, just being able to heal 90 off of a Silvally that's taken a hit. 210 isn't a particularly nice number to deal with. A lot of decks can do it, but a lot of decks will have to go for a 2-shot approach. And that's where the Moo ability is really, really strong, especially given the fact that you also have free retreat because of the Gyro Unit ability. It's just a really, really nice combination to have.
Yeah, I think for Guardy, I wouldn't play it. I know a lot of people are expecting this Miltank to be very good, but I think it's actually very, very situational, especially in Guardy, where there's not much space for one thing, physically in the 60 cards. Also, there's not much bench space, especially when people are trying to squeeze in Sylveon and Octillery and your Guardies themselves and the Leles that need to be on there. I think a lot of the time it's really bad if you have a Miltank sat on your bench because it will be so situational. Essentially, you need to have taken a hit with a Guardy, and then on that turn you can either Guzma Floatstone and Spring, in the same turn, or you need to have suffered a knockout, where you have a float stone on your Miltank already, and you also have another Gardevoir that's heavily damaged. So I think it's super situational. I think it will help out against Devolve approaches, which is maybe important. The issue being, however, Miltank himself is weak to fighting, so he's not going to stand up much of a chance against Buzzwole in the first place. So it's just really awkward. The things it's trying to cover, it doesn't do very well. I think it makes more sense in Silvally. I've tried Acerola in Silvally. I may also have to try playing one Miltank, because Silvally actually has bench space a lot of the time, and it's so easy just to gyro unit every turn. You don't need to have float stones on the Miltank. You can simply promote him in between every turn, as if he's just like a Tapu Koko. So more potential there, more likely. And yeah, maybe it's one to keep an eye out for. I think it's been overhyped, and in practice is probably too situational, and you can't really afford the bench space a lot of the time. So that will wrap up the Pokemon. Let's move on to the item cards. First of all, we have Counter Catcher. This is one that's really divided public opinion, I feel. There's a lot of people highly expecting this card to be very, very good. We're in the camp that we feel it's below the line of playability a lot of the time. The card reads, you can play this card only if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent. There's this, and there's also the Counter Energy card in the set that both rely on this sort of thing, where you fall behind and then you have comeback mechanics. You have the catcher and you have the energy that can maybe try and swing the game, and these do feel like large tempo swing cards, where you are now able to target the most important attacker on their board if it's not necessarily in the active position. Because it simply states, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active. So it is good old catcher pre-flip, but you have to be behind on prizes to do it. And really, there aren't many decks in the format right now that are in the camp where they're behind on prizes too often. It's really only going to be like Greninja and Xerneas decks. I also think Xerneas is dead, by the way, just because there's Sylveon parallel everywhere. And you know me on my standpoint in Greninja, I really hate the deck. And we've seen that Greninja actually has cut Guzma completely a lot of the time. So I doubt they'll be committing spaces for Counter Catcher, which is a situational card at best. And Greninja doesn't really need to gust things up, because it can access the bench with its snipes anyway, with its ability. So it doesn't really fit anywhere immediately. And I think in decks in general, yes, there's a lot of times when you will be behind on prizes. Yes, that's kind of an issue. But there'll be so many times when you're ahead in the game, and this is literally a dead card. And there'll be so many turns where this is in your opening hand, and it's a dead card. And there'll be times when you're equal on prizes, and it's a dead card. So why would you play a card that's dead in your deck, like, you know, over 60% of the time, I would say? It just feels like it doesn't make sense to me. It's almost like a win more card, but you have to be losing to actually play the win more card. It's really bizarre in how this mechanic works. I think the energy has much more potential than Counter Catcher. I'm, to be honest, not going to play this card in, I don't think, any deck at the moment.
Yeah, I think the other thing to note is I feel like more than ever right now, deck spaces are a premium. There's a lot of decks that sort of have a skeleton list of 55, 56 cards just to be able to deal with the rest of the format. And Countercatcher is very rarely a card I think I want to see in my last 4 slots, because it's not a consistency card. In fact, it's the opposite of a consistency card, because it's a card that you can't even use, like you say, 60% of the time. So yeah, I just think it doesn't fit in with the kind of deck style the format is playing into at the moment. The like I say, deck slots seem to be at a premium more than ever, more than, like, in my opinion, over the past few years. There's been a lot more space in decks, whereas right now I feel like a lot of decks struggle to have space for specific techs. And Countercatcher, as you say, is only actually online 50-60% of the time, so it just feels like a bit of a waste of time. The only reason we've given it a 2 stars is simply because it is a pre-nerfed catcher, and pre-nerfed catcher was bonkers. We saw pre-nerfed catcher then move to a supporter and still be bonkers. So we can't really say this is a 1-star card, because it has the potential to be really good. If we ever have a deck that naturally falls behind on prizes, that isn't sort of one that you can see here, Greninja or Xerneas, it could still be considered. But yeah, unfortunately, right now it just doesn't seem to fit into the sort of theme of the format, as well as given, like I say, the fact or the style of deck archetypes that we have right now.
There's actually one quick note I want to make. For meme lovers, Heatmore Raichu can play this card because you play puzzles, and that's quite funny. And in less meme news, you can play this in Sableye Garb just because you play like puzzles and stuff. But I think you may not even have the space for it in Sable Garb anyway. But yeah, a couple of notes just for like stall decks in general that don't ever take prizes. Something to note, but yeah, still probably not great.
Next up, we have Peaking Red Card. Some people see it as an immediate sort of buff to the old Red Card, or a complete upgrade. It's theoretically potentially more of an upgrade, but it is slightly different. Your opponent reveals their hand. You may then choose to get them to shuffle in and draw up to how many they had before they shuffled their hand in. Obviously, if they have 4 or less cards, this is an immediate buff to Red Card. And Red Card did see some play. It was never hugely popular, but it did make a couple of top 8s in regionals, or well, near like there and thereabouts. And it has seen play with things like Trev in the past. But yeah, unfortunately, again, it's just another of these cards that I really don't feel like there's any deck that has space for this kind of effect. A lot of decks right now, the format feels very all in, dealing damage, taking prizes. We've just talked about how there's not many stall decks. This is kind of a stally card. You want to check whether your opponent has any resources, and if they do, you want to shuffle them back into their deck. And yeah, it just kind of feels very, very underwhelming, given that a lot of decks nowadays are winning based off of prizes, not based off of sort of an attrition game. So it could be seen as an immediate buff to Red Card, but I don't think Red Card is seeing really any play at all right now. And Peaking Red Card, I will be very surprised if it sees any play at all. It's just worth having because Red Card has seen play in the past. So there may still be room for this in a bit of a different format to the one we're in right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think being able to look and choose is pretty cool. Like sometimes your opponent could have had a dead card, even if it was like 7 cards, and then you red card them and they're actually fine. Now you can look at their hand and be like, oh, you actually have nothing. Okay, keep that hand. But in a similar spot, there can be people who have above 4 card hand sizes, and then peaking red card is like worse. I don't see this card being amazing. Maybe if you can like lower their hand size somehow, you can affect it and then go for the red card. Yeah, I still think it's pretty weak overall. Yay, I get to talk about Silvally again. Here are the memory cards. Basically, it simply states Silvally then gains the typing. And as we mentioned, you can now have fighting typing to help out against Zoroark and Drampa, 2 pretty important cards actually in the meta. And also mirror matches, bear that in mind. And you can gain the psychic typing for Buzzwole, which covers your fighting weakness, which is also pretty cool. To an extent, at least. I mean, if they're going to be playing Zygarde anyway, you're still probably going to get wrecked. But also something like Espeon GX is pretty nice. And Silvally takes consistent 2 hits, can 1 hit with its GX attack. Now if you're hitting for weakness on top of that, he can be an absolute machine and can be very difficult to take out. So keep an eye out for these. There will be more coming. It just depends on how many. And Jack already touched on it earlier that if we end up getting all the types of Silvally, I think there are like 10 that he can gain. That would be crazy because he'll stay in rotation for like 2 years, and whatever the best deck of the time is, he could in theory counter it by just putting in the tool that hits for weakness. Unless, of course, the best deck in format is going to be the Solgaleo, which it could be. I'm just be aware of that. Just remember that, guys.
We've still got a long time before Solgaleo is out. The only thing I want to mention that you didn't touch on with the memories is actually the interaction with Necrozma. The way these cards state, Silvally becomes the type of the card. It's not an addition to, like the evolutions of Ancient Origins. So you can then hit a Necrozma if you have a memory card attached. That's one of the only things worth noting, just because there is a difference between this card turning into a fighting type and this card being a fighting type in addition to its normal type. Mm-hmm. But yeah, other than that, as Joe said, these are relevant as long as there are relevant Pokemon they hit, and the more types we get, the stronger Silvally gets. So We've just got to wait and see whether we get all 9 or 10 types or whether they stop at 4. We've just got to wait and see, really. Next up, we have Gladion. Gladion has a really, really interesting effect, very similar to sort of a combination of things like Town Map, Azelf, Rotom Dex, all of these sort of prize manipulating effects. You look at your face down prize cards, put one of them into your hand, you don't have to reveal it, then shuffle Gladion into your remaining prize cards and put them back face down. If you didn't play Gladion from your hand, this supporter does nothing. That's for things like Sableye and stuff that can copy the effects of supporters as attacks. Overall, it's a relatively irrelevant line, but it is worth noting because I have no idea how that interaction would even be like work at all. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting effect. Azelf was a really, really good card back in the day. It was, of course, an ability or a poke power, as opposed to your supporter for the turn. But if you know you've got a DCE prized, or you know you've got your last Gardevoir prized, or your Rescue Stretch or whatever, you can Gladion to get the exact card you need, and then shuffle Gladion back into the prizes, knowing that effectively you could potentially have a dead prize, but also you're going to know one of your prize cards at that point. Or you're going to know all of your prize cards, but you're going to know at least one of them isn't going to be particularly relevant, so it doesn't matter if you don't draw it till the end of the game. Whereas if you're sort of sitting there with 2 Guardies in the discard and 1 in the prizes, at that point you don't really have a particularly good win condition. So yeah, Gladion can obviously see some kind of competitive play. The biggest thing for me is I don't think there's many decks that really want to give up a turn to be able to use, or give up their supporter for the turn to be able to use this effect. It's a pretty cool effect, but there's a lot of the time, as I've just said, the format is about being aggressive, taking knockouts, winning in 6 prizes quicker than the opponent rather than sort of an attrition resource management game a lot of the time. And this doesn't really fit that theme simply because you are going to have to use your supporter for the turn to get one specific card. Feels similar to sort of a Misty's kind of card or a Skylar kind of card. And these cards aren't particularly popular right now. They're seen as maybe one-offs in some of these Stage 2 decks that require combos with Candy and Ultra Ball and things like that. But the format feels a little bit too fast for some of these supporters. And because of that, I don't think Gladion will see too much play. But I think this is possibly one of the better sort of one-off supporters that you could throw into the deck, simply because it is going to mean you can get your sort of awkward prizes out, access your awkward prizes, and still carry on through the game in certain situations where otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I actually really like Gladion. I think I'm going to be testing him, definitely. I think he's actually a really skillful to play card. Players who write down their actual 6 prizes, or at least memorize their 6 prizes in their opening search, that will be much more valuable when you have Gladion in your deck, because there can be these turns where you literally need X card on this turn, and if you Sycamore and whiff, you lose, but you know it's prized because you did your deck search on turn 1, and then you can just Lele Gladion, find it and do things. That would be so good. And I think at the moment we don't have many decks that outright lose to their prizes. Persimmon was one of the first ones that jumped to my mind, because Persimmon being in the prizes hurts your team play output. But if ever we get one of those style decks, like the old Gyarados, Gladion becomes a staple in that deck. Right now, I don't think he's a staple in any deck, but he could also influence deck building in that you can now cut down from 2-ofs of certain cards down to 1-ofs to fit the Gladion in instead, to maybe cut some corners and save some deck slots maybe for some other consistency cards. So I like him being a 1-of in that regard, and I like that he's searchable as well with Lele. So once you've done your little deck search with an Ultra Ball, you can be okay, I know what's prized, now I can Gladion and find the card that I need this turn. It's not many games or many situations during the game that you will need exactly just one card, and it could also not be prized, of course. And Gladion loses value the longer the game goes because, you're less likely to have things prized as you take prize cards naturally. So I think he'll be experimented with. I definitely want to toy around with him. It does let you cut some corners, which is cool, but I don't think he naturally just has to go in any deck right now. Quick mention of Dashing Pouch. You will pull this. You will be sad. It is in the set. It's a really, really bad tool. If the Pokemon this card is attached to discards energy for its retreat cost, put that energy into your hand instead of your discard pile. Please just play Floatstone instead. It's so much better of a tool. Maybe you're trying to, maybe you're attached to a Lele that you didn't actually want to attach to, and you just get an early energy drive, and then you just Dashing Pouch away and attach that DC to a Dramper or something, and hooray, suddenly you're berserking out of nowhere because your Lele got hit for a 2-shot, and then it's crazy cool combos that just happened. But man, it's just not going to happen. Just play Floatstone instead, please. Just attach to the right Pokemon in the first instance, and then you're fine. So, yeah. No on Dashing Pouch.
Next up, we've got Lusamine, another supporter from the set. And a pretty interesting one as well. Put in any combination of supporter and stadium cards from a discard pile into your hand. Obviously, we don't have VS Seeker anymore, so actually this is one of the only ways we can recover supporter cards right now, which could sort of justify it seeing play in general. That being said, in a similar vein to Gladion, it does take up your supporter for the turn, and I think we are in too aggressive of a format to be able to give up that supporter for the turn. I actually think its sort of impact is much more relevant in Expanded in Primal Groudon, because you're able to get back your tropical beaches once they've been bounced, or once you've even Gaia Volcanoed them. So you can actually use Lusamine as not only a recovery card, but also a draw supporter in being able to get Tropical Beach back, as well as sort of a damage supporter by just getting a stadium back for Gaia Volcano. So actually in Primal Groudon and Expanded, it's got a lot more uses. The only two really relevant stadiums right now are Po-Town and Parallel City. Being able to parallel your opponent again after they think they've bounced your only parallel can be really, really important, and is one of the something I think a lot of people overlook. I think a lot of people see one parallel, deal with one parallel, and then forget about parallel. So having the second parallel in the form of a Lusamine could be pretty good. And Po-Town is obviously another really, really annoying stadium for your opponent to have to deal with. But again, I think it's just a little bit too slow for the standard format. I think we don't have enough time in the way the metagame is at the moment to be able to use this kind of supporter. You have to be using a Sycamore or an N or a Guzma a lot of the time to progress your board state or progress your hand state, rather than get back cards for this turn or next turn, because there is so much N-ing and stuff in the format anyway. A lot of the time you're not even going to be able to keep the cards you have. So yeah, it's a nice recovery option, but I think unfortunately right now, while we have things like N and Sycamore in the format, it is a little bit too slow. But definitely post-rotation Sun and Moon on format, this is going to be a really, really cool recovery card to have.
Yeah, I think it's cool recovery. As you said, probably too slow. If maybe we get more impactful stadiums, it could see more value. Like Parallel and Po-Town, yes, they're helpful. Yes, it's also actually important to remove these stadiums for other decks who are playing different stadiums. So Lusamine could help out. Just if you're only playing like one or two stadiums of your own, you can Lusamine to then bounce other stadiums and contest the stadium war. But at that point, you could just play more field blurs if you're really concerned about like heavy Po-Town decks. So yeah, it feels a little bit slow to me. I know a few people are hyped on this card, and I can see why they are, but I think you are literally using your turn to do so little. Especially when everyone will just N you anyway a lot of the time. Like, I think it's super low impact. People have seen Versus Seeker and they just see how good that is, but it's a completely different card in my eyes. So yeah, probably too slow overall. I think you'd be better off just upping the count of the supporter that you would most likely recover. For example, don't go down to 3 Guzma to fit in a Lusamine, just play 4 Guzma. Probably gonna do you better overall, I would say. Next up is Sea of Nothingness. We have rated this 1 star, and it is not even close. This is, again, quite a bad card. Special conditions are not removed when Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, evolve or devolve. Yeah, these are the ways we can poison things. We have Poison Barb and Salazzle, and we have Nihilego, I guess. That should have been on the slide. And we have Seviper, which can increase damage from poison in Standard. Obviously, in Expanded, you have Laser, but you also have Verbank, so you'll never play this stadium. So you'd have to play like Seviper, Sea of Nothingness, Nihilego. I don't know what you're doing to try and make poison work. If you're trying to make it work, you're being a super edgy dude. And if you're trying to counter evolution decks, you should probably just play Potown instead. Yeah, Sea of Nothingness is really, really poor.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The next stadium is Devoured Field. A 3-star card. It is slightly better than Sea of Nothingness. Very similar to Reverse Valley. The attacks of your Darkness Pokemon or of Darkness Pokemon and Dragon Pokemon do 10 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon. Obviously, this kind of a stadium has always been pretty useful in just pushing numbers to slightly more favorable numbers in general. I think the biggest impact, as you can see, is Zoroark and Noivern. For Noivern, in fact, it's really, really big in the expanded format because obviously the deck has access to DDE. This pushes Distort up to 60 damage, dealing with a lot of 60 HP Pokemon that are seeing play right now. And with a Choice Band, it pushes Distort to 90 damage, which is two-shotting a lot of Pokemon right now. So Distort actually becomes relevant. So maybe this becomes a slightly better item lock than Toad. It'll be interesting to see whether that is the case. But that being said, I think because we have Reverse Valley, but Reverse Valley isn't seeing too much play right now because Dark isn't particularly relevant right now. Devoured Field won't make too much of a huge impact in the standard format. But it is now inherently, I think, probably a better Reverse Valley just because the metal type does seem to be seeing a little bit more popularity. So you don't want to have your opponent's metal types being buffed with an extra 10 HP, and I think you're more likely to see metal types than dark types. So you're going to have less of a downside if you're playing Devoured Field over Reverse Valley in your dark decks in standard right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it goes over Reverse Valley if ever you need that little plus 10 damage buff. There are literally 0 standard dragon Pokemon that we're using in the format. But huge point on the Noivern. Really like they can two-shot things. And also, again, as we mentioned with the Mismagius, doing the Chaos Wheel style effect is really good and expanded. So Noivern being able to use Sonic Volume as well just gets much more value now that Zoroark GX is nuts and expanded. So Noivern could start to look good and expanded. That's going to be really cool. I think he is looking pretty good. So yeah, Devoured Field maybe makes that happen. Very nice stuff. Finally, onto Counter Energy. This is a card that I am really excited about. I wanted to push this card to a higher rating just because it has bags of potential and is such a creative design. I really like this card. It provides a colorless energy, but if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponents, and if this Pokemon is attached to a Pokemon that isn't a GX or EX Pokemon, this card provides every type of energy, but provides only 2 energy at a time. So think of it as a DCE that has any type. That's really insane. Obviously, you have to be behind on prizes, which is the big caveat here. But it can cause some crazy tempo swings with some really good basic non-EX, non-GX Pokemon, as you can see. We've thrown out a bunch here. Cabalion's probably the one that springs to mind most and would almost be a staple in Counter Energy style archetypes. Because Revenge Blast could be really efficient at dealing with Gardevoir GX decks. I think they only need to have taken 2 prizes against you if you have a Choice Band, and you can be Revenge Blasting for 1-hit KOs on a single attachment on a non-EX. That's so insane. Sudowoodo has the Watch and Learn attack, similar to the Mimikyu. They can both copy what your opponent's just used. Keldeo has Resolute Blade. That can be a really nice counter to Volcanion lists, again, just for a single energy. Shining Genesect with Gaia Blaster, and thanks to his own ability, Energy Reload, he can power himself up to hit for Grass Weakness on things like, Greninja, and also against any other Grass Weak Pokemon like the Zygarde, if that starts popping up in aggressive Buzzwole lists. Spiritomb is basically the Tapu Lele that's still been delayed and has never come to standard yet, that everyone's worried about for expanded. And you can actually do it in a single attachment now, the damage play with Counter Energy, And you're more than likely going to be behind if you're playing a spread damage, like Meowstic styled deck. So Counter Energy could be really sneaky to finish off games, and just your opponent can't play around it if you can just drop the combo all in a single turn. So, you know, the crazy Zoroark Meowstic list that I tried to play? Well, guess what? Maybe you can play Spiritomb and a few Counter Energies in that list, gain a few spaces, and then also play things like Cobalion in the deck to further improve your Gardevoir. So could be really cool mini buff for the spread Zoroark build, which is really awesome. Mew as well is a really interesting one because it can of course copy the attacks of EX and GXs if they're basics on your own bench. So even though Counter Energy itself states that Pokemon EX and GX can't use Counter Energy, you can go via the Mew and still steal some good attacks. So that's pretty cool. And it's not just basic Pokemon that can benefit from this. It's also, you know, evolutions out there right now. Gengar is another one that I want to try out. The Creepshow is guaranteed one-hit KOs, which is pretty crazy. So, yeah, there's Counter Energy. It's situational, but it is a huge tempo swing when it comes off. And you can counter some pretty important cards in the meta right now. So I'm really excited for this card.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think we could sit and talk about the uses for Counter Energy all day. There's so many different Pokemon that now you have to reconsider now that they have Energy Acceleration. So I won't say too much more, but yeah, just having a deck that sort of can cover so many different matchups and then all be based off of sort of 4 Counter Energy, 4 Rainbow Energy or whatever. You know, it's just going to be a really, really inherently strong deck for dealing with various matchups in the format. So yeah, Counter Energy is definitely one of the more interesting and I think best energy cards we've had in quite a while, to be honest. So yeah, that is it. As you can see, we have indeed done sort of a combination of, or sort of a summary of all of the star ratings. Unfortunately, there were no 5-star cards in this set, which may be why people sort of have seen this set as slightly underwhelming. I think we've been spoiled over the past 2 or 3 sets, though. Overall, I think this is more of a standard set in general from what we would expect. Plus, we also have just had Shining Legends, which had Zoroark GX in there. So if you lump it all together, we did at least get 1 5-star card over the past 3 months. A couple of 4 stars, only Silvally and Buzzwole. But a lot more sort of 3, 2, and 1 stars, just kind of keeping the binder and maybe hold on to playsets of just until the format slows down or slightly changes it up. But without a doubt, Silvally and Buzzwole are definitely going to make an impact in this format. I don't know that they're particularly top tier. There's still a lot of testing to be done, both from us and I think in general. But that being said, they're definitely some very, very strong cards and definitely worth getting your hands on. If not before London, I think even post London is fine, just because these are looking to be strong for the next few months. So even if you can't get your hands on them for London, they're definitely worth picking up even so. So yeah, whilst it's not the most impactful set overall, there is still some pretty interesting cards in the set worth talking about, as we have done today.
Yeah, really interesting cards, and that is going to wrap it up, guys. What do you think? What did we miss? What are the best cards? What are you excited for? What did we mull over? What have we got wrong? We want to hear it all in the discussion down below. I do believe, if not the best set, this is definitely one of the more controversial sets that we've seen in the last few months. So definitely do get involved. Let us know what you thought about the video. And leave a like as always. Sub to the channel if you've not already. And Jack, do you have anything else to say?
No, other than that, make sure you're there at London Internationals. Both me and Joe will be there. Joe will be commentating, and I may even be trying some of these new cards in my deck. We'll have to wait and see. So yeah, other than that, thank you very, very much for watching. Stay tuned for lots more OmniPoke content. We've got so much to pump out to you guys now that Crimson Invasion is getting closer and closer to the reveal date or release date, and London is coming up. So yeah, make sure you stay tuned. And other than that, we look forward to seeing you guys in another video.